I'm going to record now.
Oh.
Okay. Right. Okay. So hello and welcome to Lockdown Still Lives Show and Tell Part 13. And today we're covering art and politics, a subject brought up by Julia last week. And we kind of already in the last session started passionately talking about it. So I'm very curious to hear your stories about art and politics and how those two are intertwined or not, or what your theory and views are on it. And if you don't mind, I would like to maybe ask actually Julia to start, because she brought the subject.
Yes, then I can listen.
Okay, and I'll put you on spotlight. So, okay.
Right. Okie doke. Right, well, this is how politics affects me personally. So I'm going to try and bring up my thing now. There it is. Right. You might have noticed I put a thing on about Laocoon on the advertisement we put up for what's going down.
Share the screen, Julia.
Share the screen. Oh, I haven't shared the screen yet. Okay, right. Where is that then? That button.
Go back to your.
Go back.
Go back to the.
Right. Get rid of this again. Now share.
No, share screen.
Right. Okay. Sorry. And now there it is there. Right.
Share.
Share. Okay. Thank you. Right. Well, I'll just plow on then and tell you how politics, if it does, affects my work at all. Right. I do not think I am intentionally political in my artwork. It just seems inherent to the human condition, because I am fascinated by mythological subjects. Sorry, I'm going to shut the door, Roger. Can you hear an echo? I do apologise. Sorry, didn't mean to slam it. Okay, and you know, things like Metamorphosis, Ovid, the Golden Bough, the Iliad, on and on. And I'm mostly intrigued by the type of cautionary tale that they usually include. Stories illustrating ideas which reflect on problems associated with how we cope with love, life, and loss. And trying to express our need to understand what makes us tick is what gives me inspiration. And so it was, I turned to the myth of Laocoon for inspiration. And there it is in all its glory. And I don't know how many of you know the story of Laocoon, but as you will see, I've correspondingly put a drawing I did where I've substituted Lady Laocoon, who you may realize is me, well, I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I suppose my main political obsession would have to be with feminism, which emerges naturally from my human condition of being female. It's not an easy subject to address because I'm quite passionate about women's rights, and yet also sometimes confused by how they can be achieved. A lot of this subjective experience of being a girl and then a woman has been a painful journey, both physically and mentally. Being this particular gender has, however, given me a lot of inspiration. And I am drawn to look at the work of all artists, but in particular women who have or do make art, because in terms of their success, they have been often left out in the cold and only referred to in connection with male artists or partners. Being human is at best a complicated experience, but in what I still consider to be a patriarchal society, you can argue with me about that later if you want, being of the female gender is decidedly harder when it comes to being an artist or anything else for that matter. Perhaps I look to stories of gods to illuminate what I often feel in my own case is a surreal existence. I'm not alone in being fascinated by how I as a woman fit into this world. I looked to other artists like Louise Bourgeois, Paula Rego, Kathy Kollwitz, Frida Kahlo, Leonora Carrington, Dorothea Tanning, Kara Walker. They're all exhibitions I've seen quite recently, well, recently before all this. And so many others who have looked into the circumstances of women to inspire their work. So, and this is, I'm particularly fond of Kath Kollwitz, who lost her son in the Second World War, and a lot of her work is about motherhood. So to continue, I absolutely love her drawings and as well as her sculpture. Particularly as a mother, I have struggled to balance my personal needs with those of my children. And it was because of this, I think I was drawn to the image of Laocoon. For although the parent in this image is the father, the sacrifice of his sons for his belief in warning the Trojans against the wooden horse, hiding the Greeks within, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, ultimately led to his sons being killed by sea serpents at Poseidon's order. I.e., he blew the whistle and he suffered the consequences. Would a woman have sacrificed her sons for a political belief or their honor? Now, there is a question we could discuss about, you know, whether men and women have the same attitude towards their children, etc. From the minute our children are born, we fear for their safety, but also encourage them to be adventurous. Their well-being, however, is reliant on the world we live in. And when my first two sons were quite little, I, being interested and involved in Greenpeace, was taking them out delivering pamphlets, one in the pushchair, one who would run up the and continued after we'd finished with pamphlets, putting his hand through letterboxes, so that I started to worry if he would actually end up getting bitten by a dog. Anyway, the idea obviously being to alert people to the contamination of the world, which is obviously quite, you know, topical now. Anyway, I chose to do that, but slowly, with the birth of my second child, it became evident to me that life was not only getting in the way of my art, but also my politics. It seemed to me that our children required my almost total concentration on them, and that their welfare, happiness, and education, and the time to focus on their needs left me with little time to engage with politics. I wouldn't agree with this anymore, but that's how I felt then. I had an almost animal-like need to protect and provide for them and ensure their survival. So my feminism ebbed away. I'm not saying I wouldn't do the same thing again, but, you know, it's a different world. My painting, Lady Laocoon, done in recent times whilst working in a stained glass type of image, relates to the struggle to do right by society, engaging with art and politics, and yet my maternal fear that in neglecting my family, the wrath of the gods might be brought down upon me. Hence the divisive black lines as in stained glass. I was very attracted to the idea of stained glass telling stories at the time. And it also suggested to me a kind of shattering of the story, breaking it up. When weighed in the balance, it seemed we are all found wanting and will sacrifice our principles to ensure the safety of our young. Interestingly, I've been watching the blue tits going back and forth conscientiously to the nest of their young underneath our pipe. They keep going back and forth, and Roger remarked that they look like they've been through the washing machine and they are completely and utterly exhausting themselves feeding their young. It's probably their second year there. Anyway, it's the same thing, but nature, natural desire to protect your young. I changed the image of Laocoon to an animalistic version of myself wrestling with the serpents to protect my two sons. A photo taken of me and them at Skidney Mill many years ago, in front of a giant cog from the mill, so resembled the Laocoon statue, echoing the struggle that in my rather literal way, I transferred it into my Lady Laocoon painting. And I would say at this point, and Caroline knew me then, I was struggling, really struggling with my children. I found, you know, what do I do? What's the right thing to do? I've recently been up to Skidby Mill, and that huge cog, which seemed really important at the time, is still there, but it's broken. A piece is broken off it, which I found me thinking I might do another painting. But anyway, I didn't find it easy. I find most of life a bit of a struggle, and motherhood I both loved and probably hated at times. But politics is even bigger pain when over and over again we see history repeat itself and change in the face of politics fails to materialize. I personally keep trying with my work to find a way through it all and to reflect on the love as well as the hate, even though I know perfectly well you have to fight for what you believe in. And here I am encased, courtesy of using Adobe and goodness knows what, and I came to the conclusion that I'd rather paint things than do things this way, because in the end, I feel the painting is an organic thing, whereas when I do this altering photographs, it's interesting. It was interesting, and I did it for quite a while. But I realised I much prefer to do the drawings in preparation, like the one at the top. I'll go back through them, because I feel that the drawings somehow reflect more of what I feel. I mean, as you can see, I'm very hairy, and there's the serpents. I also like to add that both of them have grown up safely. They're in their 40s now. And I could probably have worried an awful lot less about them had I known, but there you go. Anyway, that's my little contribution to politics and art. Thank you, Jen.
Ah, Julia, that's incredible. Thank you so much. I like the way how you kind of brought motherhood into this, and it's, again, such a rich topic, and I can, and I'm sure a lot of mothers in the room can relate to this ferocious need to protect, and yeah, the questioning of, you know, the principles and what we actually sacrifice in order to make sure they are okay. So yes, really good questions you've thrown up there, actually. Thank you. But anybody else, I'm sure lots of people have something to say to you.
What's the house in the background on that picture?
It's the Bluebird. It's behind the Bluebird. It used to be the sausage maker's place. Well, it's near Bishop.
Rolston Manor is just, I mean, by Raywell, Rolston's
Yeah,
Manor.
Raywell, that's it. And we often go for walks, especially during lockdown, actually. We've been revisiting a lot of places we used to take our children. And that's one of them. And the house always fascinated me up on the hill because it was so, you know, powerful and grand. And I always felt, and then Roger told me the sausage maker owned it.
Yeah, that was really good, Julia. I like the...
Well, I'm still struggling because, you know, you prioritize politics, you know. I've been trying for so long, and to me, things seem to be going backwards. A certain wedding that happened just about finished me off.
Oh, well, the royal one.
No, well, yeah, somebody who does think they're royal, I think. Somebody on their third wedding.
No, I thought it was...
Oh,
Feminism.
our friend, our leader.
Yeah, he's no friend to me, Caroline. He's
I
a
thought it was really
twat.
interesting with the mother, because I'm not a mother, but I have looked after. You know, I think motherhood is serious feminist issue. Because when I was in London, the demands of the women's liberation movement included free childcare for all women, because that is one of the biggest issues with, especially if you have to bring them up more or less on your own. No respite from, you know, that responsibility, and it's a very individual responsibility, even though the state is supposed to provide, but you know, it doesn't really value sometimes women and children as much as it should, you know. So I think the personal is political, actually. I was always, and that came up a lot when I was in London, when I was around loads of, you know, there was lots going on, struggles, all sorts of struggles around the world. And I think that women seem to be, because it's women that get affected by everything. So if there's a miners' strike, who gets affected? You know, it's the women.
Well, you have to bear in mind that mine was a long time ago. For instance, we paid for nursery. There wasn't, you know, by the time my next two children were born, they started to provide some nursery spare in schools. I ended up actually working at the private nursery that my children went to. But there's just never enough time when you've got children. And, you know, somebody has to do the servicing of the home.
Yeah, I remember in the 70s, it must have been the 70s, when I was just about leaving art school. I remember talking to my mum about, there was a bit of a sort of movement for wages for housewives. It's called Wages for Housewives. Thinking about that now, just
I remember that, Caroline.
And that, and then I remember having really interesting talks with her about it, because she was, in a sense, she was there, we'd never call herself feminist, but she was a very strong woman, and she had her own nursery school and did it, always worked. But she was just so aghast at it, you know. She was, her generation just could not get their head around anything like that at all. Again, yesterday, I don't often listen to Woman's Eye. I was on Radio 4 yesterday. They had a resurgence of it. There's been a resurgence of it from quite a few books and various women that have written all sorts of essays and, you know, things recently about the fact that nothing's changed really from the 70s. If you look at the data in terms of, you know, there may be on the surface more women doing everything, working as well as, of course, but I mean, women have always worked anyway with hundreds of children.
I suppose we have entered a period of time which is now also connected to the Greenpeace thing, where we have far more gadgets to do things than I had or could afford to have. But we now have all these gadgets and all these things to help us and make life easier. And I often think about, I used to have these McLaren pushchairs, the best thing ever, because they folded up, you could take them on a bus. They weren't, and then suddenly it was as though the manufacturers thought, oh, these aren't good enough, we have to put knobs and blocks on it and this, and suddenly the pushchairs, by the time my children have had children, had these things that look like tanks, you know, and I thought, here we go again. It's like, you know, building up, and what you need is quite simple things to help, you know, and instead we've gone down the route of making them more and more and more complicated. And I'll be honest, I do feel we're now getting the rough end of that, in as much as our consumption rate is obviously, you know, very heavily involved in climate change and whatever. And women, I mean, I don't know if anybody's watched Motherland. It makes me laugh on telly at the moment with that actress. And, you know, it is very familiar, all those problems and issues around how you cope with your children and still have a life.
There's a lot of books being written by many young women now, though, who are saying, you know, that motherhood is not all it's cracked up to be. And when I was having children, that was a rare thing to open your mouth and say that you were having, you know, a really bad week, or how bored you were, or how you're climbing up the walls with having to, you know, whatever you were doing. It was very unusual to hear that voice, even amongst your friends, really. You know, we did, obviously, Julia and I must have had some moans occasionally. I had children slightly later than Julia, but we did.
Yeah, yours matched my second too.
Yeah.
But you did once say, Caroline, and you'll have forgotten this, but you did say I'd made a career of having children. I nearly hit you at the time.
I think because at the time you were beating yourself up a bit about,
Oh God, yeah, I was beating myself up all the time.
Fantastic, you know, what you're nurturing. I do think there's a lot to be said for somehow putting some value in society on women there, and men, whichever one of the person has the caring role or wants the caring role, to actually put some value on it. I really do. I still think that even now.
That's one thing I really said. I thought it came as a shock to me how much work they are, children. I was like, I was a little bit, and my immediate reaction was like, I'm not getting paid for any of this. I'm not even kind of getting the recognition for how hard it actually is. And I thought, yeah, there should be a movement. And this is kind of quite nice, Julia, that you do bring this into the conversation when we're talking about art and politics, because politics is often seen as, it is actually quite a male subject. You know, it often becomes something that's really quite male, all the topics. But, you know, talking about motherhood in a political way, I think is needed. It's needed as a debate, as a conversation. And as Caroline just said, I think the conversation luckily has moved on tremendously since the 70s. And I think even at the moment, there is something happening because of lockdown. And a lot of women are really speaking out of how much of the burden has been put on women. And
I really didn't mind the child bit of it. I'm a playful person. I loved all the gluing, the sticking. It's the chores. It's the endless chores. And you all know Roger, and he's a very good, but he was working very hard, and he was working in the evenings, and he was working. And there just wasn't any room for anything else, it seemed to me at the time, without, you know, somebody not doing something, you know, because there wasn't the provision. And I don't think there's enough now. And when you talk about politics, I definitely feel women frequently drop out of being MPs and whatever because they literally cannot cope with the burden of, you know, things are not made easy so women can contribute to politics, I think, because there is this, you know, little or no provision, even though they keep telling you there is. I can see the same struggle going on for my children and both my daughter-in-law's work. And I can see how hard it is. They work part-time. One of them works part-time. And the one good thing I would say that has come out of that is, I'm not criticizing Roger here, but I would say my sons are very hands-on when it comes to bringing up their children. They have to be. They've got no choice because, you know, their wives, their partners are working as well. And, you know, that's it. They've just got to. And so somehow something's got to give.
I think what you said about personal being political is really true. The word political is bandied about as if it's some major sort of movement. It's just about your life, how you see your life, and to me that is personal. I've got a quote here which I haven't got anything presented, but I just thought this was really made me laugh.
Shall we move on to you, Caroline? That would be nice.
I haven't really got something to say except for ad bits, but there's this love. I can just withdraw on a bit. Politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it and incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. And guess who said that? Groucho Marx. I just think that's
brilliant. That's really good.
I mean, it makes me laugh because you can twist it round to whatever you want, can't you? I mean, when I was going to do a presentation, which I ran out of time for properly this week, but I should done it last week as well, but I have had other things in my head really. But some of the quotes on politics and art are just absolutely wonderful. They really are. There's another fantastic one here. Ad Reinhardt. Art is art and everything else is everything else. I thought that was a good one. Because it's like, I remember I was listening to radio again. I listen to radio a lot. When I was doing something last week, and a woman was ringing in about the new systems for, you know, the changing laws coming in for masks and etc. etc. And she started her figures, and I literally thought, well, you know, she said, I haven't got any thoughts about politics whatsoever. I don't get involved in it. I have no political views whatsoever. And I thought, well, that in itself is a political view, isn't it?
Yeah.
You cannot get away from it, really. And she was talking about, you know, how you shouldn't get involved in things. You should just look after your families. I thought, well, that in itself is a statement, and you're making a statement about politics. So I think every single thing you do, the way you live your life, I agree with Guinness, you know, every single sort of choice you make, road you go down, it's all about politics. And if you are a creative person, those choices, as we've said in the past in other debates on this, you know, platform, they can be very, very, very difficult. I mean, Virginia Woolf said, you know, a room of your own and all that. It's so hard, isn't it, to have space in your head for yourself? And I think that's for men and women, actually. It's very hard to keep focused on making the time and making the structures, really, to do the art that you really feel that, you know, you should give time to. Because unless you practice your art, whatever that is, it doesn't happen. You know, you've got to make it or do it or practice it. It's like, if you want to write. Don't talk about writing. It's like, get on with it. At the kitchen table, etc. But again, you know, time is absolutely, really, really a problem. When I first sort of did my MA on theatre studies, which was what I would have loved to have done originally, you know, at maybe a degree or whatever, instead of go to art school, even though that's who I am as well. And I remember I chose an option called, you know, political theatre, because I didn't really know that much about it. I knew I'd been to see a lot of it in London, and I'd been in shows that had, I suppose, overtly socialist themes and tended to want to do work like that when I was younger. But it was really fantastic to learn about stories which, again, have come down here from Greece, really, from the origins of where theatre happened. About, you know, politics, and this all started with democracy and all those, and stories are about what sort of lives do we lead, every single story in any show you ever see. I did a wonderful piece, well, quite a lot actually, because we had it was one of the syllabuses at one point, and it was called Our Country's Good. Our Country's Good in the two ways, you could read it both ways, Our Country is Good, or Our Country's for Our Country's Good. And it's about transportation to Australia. Does anybody know of the play?
No.
Have you heard of it? It was written by Timberlake Wertenbaker, who a fantastic woman playwright, major feminist writer, and she decided that she was going to write a play about the inequalities, basically the criminal justice system, and how it's evolved in our country, really. And the very first page in this script, this text, remember, these were A-level students, and I'd seen the play anyway before, and I loved it. So I thought, I really want to do this play. But when you're, say, for example, when you're working with students, obviously they leave their books about when they're studying at home and stuff, you know, like many students, kids at school, they leave their work about. And the very first page of it is this amazing monologue. And it's set in the bowels of it's a great play. I think it's set in the bowels of this transport ship, and there are, you know, various bodies lying about, chained, etc. And these are all people who've just been sent to Australia for stealing bread, or, you know, whatever, the most, you know, menial things, because they were overflowing. The jails were overflowing when transportation was still on, and that's what they did. they sent them for the most menial things. And there's this speech this guy says, and he basically talks about how he's come from this world, from London. He's come from London, but there are quite a few people from all over the country there, Bristol, all sorts of people. So there's lots of wonderful accents. There's lots of different, many different races in this boat, because they come from all over the world to this particular hub where they're going to be taken to Sydney. It's the very first ship that went out to Sydney. It's based on sort of lots of history and truth. And this, in this particular speech, he uses the expression, I tried to look for the play, and I know I lent it to somebody. I was going to have it ready, and I can't read it. It's a wonderful monologue. But he says something like, give me, it's a little bit like the speech in America, you know, with the Statue of Liberty that says, send me your refuge, you know, send me all those people. What's that lovely speech? Where it's all about people from all over the world, come to New York, etc., come to America. Anyway, it's more about, this is where I've come from. And in the speech, he says, it's literally about the 10th word in the play as it opens. And he says, give me the best cunt of England. And he said, you know, this, can you imagine 16-year-olds seeing this on the very first page of this play? Of course, they all is a bit, you know, bit low-key about it. Oh God, here we go, you know, what have you put this play now? Obviously, they all look up when that happens. And from that way onward, the play is so fantastic because it talks about the reality, the darkness, the sort of, the worst aspects of human behaviour and how they get redeemed through art. Because when they get to Sydney, they all decided, and this happened, the powers that be there decided they're going to put on a play for the prisoners because they will keep them happy, it'll stop them from revolting. And they put on this play, so there's a play within a play. And you see these people all, you know, because I'm a great believer in the power of being the arts can what can do for everybody, you know. And you see all these people from all these different horrendous backgrounds, some, you know, fantastically intelligent, some completely illiterate, some, you know, all sorts of, every possible criminal sort of possibility that was sent on these ships, all becoming completely different people through being in this play. And it all gradually sort of equates to the people finding a level of respect for each other, the people who have to keep them in their compound. Because the people, in a way, who are on the transport ships looking after them, they're equally stuck in their horrendous world of having to, you know, whip and punish and all the sort of things they did. We're talking about something like 1760, something like that, 1780, this era. It is, but for me, that was, you know, a particular play that I remember really politicised quite a few of my students who hadn't even really, never thought that drama could be, or theatre could be a thinking thing, that you actually have a critical view of what is politics or what is right or what isn't right or what could be right, what should we be doing. And it really started some amazing debates. So to me, you know, it is about, because some of them, you know, they thought they were doing performing arts, they thought they were going to be doing Joseph's and Technicolor Dreamcoat all day long, which we didn't do. So it was like, it was, I think it is so fantastic. The sort of political theatre that I also looked at was, when I first did my MA, was very early on, pamphleteers who put on sort of very didactic things that just spoke out at you and told you what they thought. I found out all the different levels of sort of political drama and political theatre, and I found out which ones I preferred, which for me were showing you the possibilities, but it could be like that. So therefore I really got into Brecht then, because I knew who he was, because remember I was in my 40s before I did a theatre study, even though I've been an actor and stuff. So it was so illuminating to see there's so many different ways you can throw politics out to people without saying, this is politics. There was a fantastic play called The Measures Taken by Brecht, which is all about, he has two versions of it, the first half and the second half, and that's one version of life, and this is the other. It's like a sliding doors thing. And he was doing that in the 20s and 30s, you know. I found out so much about political theatre, and I began to realise, for me, what worked better for, you know, for me. I don't like things that shout at you and tell you something, it's obvious, you know, and get it in 5 minutes, that's how I feel. But things like this, Our Country's Good, what an amazing play it was. And, you know, many of my students really seriously took, for example, if it was like maybe their first sixth form, they wanted to do an A2 in sociology, or it changed them completely. So, you know, oh, I've just lost my bloody thing, that's great. My battery's about to go, I'm going to kick myself in. I'm wound up. That's all right. I'll just go and get my thing, and it's just about to go.
Okay.
My battery's going. Right, hang on.
Well, we don't want to.
I didn't notice. I didn't look. Hang on. I'll stick it over here. There we are. Anyway, that's your lot, folks. That's just yet another chatter. There you go. Here we are.
I know this is going back a bit, Caroline, but there was something you said before you were talking about the theatre, about women not admitting to stuff. I found it very difficult when I was being told about these magic, wonderful women who ran companies, did this, could have, and I used to think, and you did feel you could not admit to your problems. You could not admit that you found life difficult. And that's why, for me, theatre, we're going to see Moby Dick on Thursday in that amphitheatre place. Theatre, art, all these things are ways of having conversations. And as you said, Caroline, everything is politics. Everything is politics. It's not like something you have to deliberately go out and look for. Your very existence is politics. And so any way that, and you know, I despair of changing. I love to hear you say that young people are wanting not to go into, you know, how can I make loads of money, and want to do things that are like sociology and things. Because my experience recently has left me feeling that there's a strange, different thing going on now that I can't relate to at all. Maybe as an aging hippie.
I think theatre in itself. That's obviously the arts I've been involved in most. Is in itself political. It's automatic, because once somebody came outside of the. I mean, if I remember the first time I realised, when I was very early on in doing other stuff, but somebody was explaining to me, or they were talking about the origins of how theatre, the first actor and all this sort of thing. We're talking about the first actor. That's, you know, how acting began as we see it. It was because people were doing rituals, they were doing celebratory things. So it's from religion really, and celebration. But then someone made the decision to stand outside of it and judge it and say, well, that was a good one, wasn't it? And then then people turned away and looked at that person. So it was it was quite a radical thing to stand outside and judge what was happening. Because say for example, if you're in a religious ritual, say in my case, we've talked about this before, Catholicism, you know, it's so classic, isn't it? You've got the priest up there, all the acolytes, and we're all standing passively watching it. And from that, things turned around the other way, and people started to sort of judge what was happening. And someone stood out of it and said, what I'd like to do is, can we move that around? Can we change that? Can we tell a story now, not just celebrate something? So, and the stories we tell are about our lives. It's innately, you know, that's why governments are scared of theatre. They're scared of plays and writers. They're scared of them because they come up with ideas that say, hang on, what if? That's not just, you know, that's what I think. I think it's all politics. You can't get away from it. Well, as somebody who's had a lot of people through our house over the years, because we do theatre digs, we've done it forever, you know, we've literally had hundreds over the years. It's been great, because when I stopped work in the theatre and had children and did a job that was easier for me not to be away on tour and stuff, I soon really realised the difference between the different styles of performance and the way of thinking, and that is quite a political stance. Because, for example, it might sound a bit generic, and this is not judging, it's just simply watching and observing people. You'd have, say, people from the New Theatre in massive tours, like, you know, big musical tours that are absolutely rigid and are kept. They're literally formula throughout the world. Some of these things, they have these musical directors and these directors who literally they literally frog march them left to right, left to right. They're literally military operations, some of these shows. And then you'd have the other people who'd be coming up to hold track, or people who would be rehearsing and playing and finding out what was happening, and every night would be different. And those two different sorts of performers are very different. They're very different politically. They are really different politically. When you talk to them, when they're in your house, you know it. You know, it's fascinating. Some people want to be in a very tight structure, doing something that is clear, always the same. You know, the absolute exclusion of any play.
That's that dilemma again, Caroline. When you're faced with the opportunity of work or no work, and so some of those people will have chosen to do things that their principles tell them are not really what they want to be doing.
No, I mean, exactly.
I've been there. You know.
You all have, haven't we? We've all had to make choices about what does make. I mean, well, the classic case is my daughter. She signed on to do the Mousetrap for a year. She was so desperate for money. By the end of it, she was going around the bend. She was so absolutely climbing the walls with, you know, boredom, and she absolutely hated it. But she said, you know, at that point, it was a choice she had to make because she hadn't made any money for, I don't know, 6 months or something. But they're classic choices we all make. But they are political choices, and I noticed at the time that the time Hester was in that show, that it's been going 47 bloody years or something mad. God knows why, because it is hideous. Anyway, I can't believe it. It's sort of like set in aspect. It is quite funny to go to it in a way, but when you go to it, I did notice that the year she was in it, she did change quite a lot through being with the people who were in it. She really didn't play. She wasn't playing at all. Wasn't herself. And I thought, wow, that's really fascinating. You know,
well, she's made up for that big time, Caroline. With all her writing, and she's made up for it big time. It takes a little time to find a way.
And empowering people to use their art as for voicing discontent about politics, and I think there is a lot of structures put in place that hinders that. One is obviously the system that we need to
they're there, aren't they, all the time?
And I think government also knows about the power and of independent thinking and of the expression of artists. So, I mean, there is a huge history, isn't it, of art being used to
it's a massive weight on us, isn't it?
So but thank you, Caroline. Thank you. Some really interesting insights there and some really good quotes. That's great. I was wondering whether, I'm not sure, I know some people haven't necessarily prepared anything today, so I'm not going to pick. Does anybody just want to go next? Would somebody like to offer? What about Jill? Okay, great. Jill, do you want to go next? Brilliant.
Can't hear you.
I'm quiet.
You should.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. It's
sorry.
The reason that I did that is because every other week I'm a duty leader on a shift, so it's probably easier for me to go this week than next week. So I hope that's okay. I hope everyone feels all right about that. Otherwise, I'd have to disappear in the middle. Right.
I love that.
I love this. Yeah, this is my this is a bit of graffiti on the back of one of the buildings on the back of Humber Street. So I'm just going to start with that. I've done mine quite quickly today, so I'm going to read it out if that's okay. But then, if there's any questions, we can do those afterwards. So, my fascination with art and politics as separate spheres goes back a long way. Labour Party politics was part of our upbringing, although my dad started as a communist and shifted towards the SDP in his later years. But my single mum was a lifelong Labour Party member, as I am, and my younger brother was an MEP. Our politics grew from our experience of class, of welfare provision, free school dinners and school uniforms, the council house when we were homeless, disability benefit for my mum, and full grants which took me to art college, my older brother to teacher training, and my younger one to Oxford. And the things we were angry about were injustice, discrimination, and inequality. I also loved the freedom and possibility. I also loved the freedom and possibility and escape of the art room. But when I got to art college, I never thought to combine those two things, my politics and my art. I was overawed by abstract paintings, which I saw then as standing outside the realities of day-to-day life. And by the way, I no longer think a painting, for example, has to be figurative to be political. I took my PGCE, it took my PGC, and then studying with the Open University to unite my politics and my art. I learned about identity politics, the absence of women artists and artists of colour, as well as art as protest or propaganda to disseminate or critique. Later, I taught about the importance of historical context. Wrong one. Historical context, Guernica, the Cold War, pop art, the French Revolution. So that in response to this brief, I'm not sure I can see the politics wood for the art trees or vice versa. So I'm just going to stop at this one for a second. So poor Julia will probably remember I probably bored her to death with this.
I love Courbet.
I love Courbet. So this was, I can remember teaching this and talking about how political it is, just in the fact that it's a big ambitious painting that at the time would have been reserved for a kind of classical story or a historical event, but a big ambitious painting was devoted to the life and the experience of working class, you know, manual labour, and that was a huge political statement at the time, but it would be hard maybe to see the politics in it now. So a lot of my teaching was intertwined with political moments or political messages. I'll just go back up again, I think that's it. Later still, I began to write about public art, which more consciously combined my concern for the social and the aesthetic. I once read that in the everyday we can be unaware of the real relationships of power that determine our lives because we live in ideology. Because I'm writing about public art, questions of power and hegemony are ever present. Who is the audience for art and public art? Who makes it and commissions it? In a city like Liverpool, and these are images from the Albert Dock at Liverpool, from a kind of square where there's an Exchange Flag Square in Liverpool, and then an exhibition at the Tate, Liverpool Tate at the Albert Dock. In a city like Liverpool with multiple publics, including descendants from slaves and slave owners, how should the public respond to statues, street names, architecture, etc., that memorialise the slave trade in a way that still looks celebratory? The context for my writing is regeneration, and I use the ideas of Marxist writers like David Harvey to understand the false promises of late-stage capitalism and neoliberalism. Urban-led regeneration is built on the assumption that attracting business and tourism will have a positive knock-on effect for local artists and residents. However, Harvey argues that interurban competition, the consequence of regeneration strategies, results in the opposite, the displacement of existing communities, the pricing out of artists and other gentrification perils. Here art can be instrumentalised so that the values, language and purposes of art are secondary to those found in, say, economics or social sciences. But how does this muddled background help me answer the brief? I have 4 points in my art politics manifesto. The first is that the politics in art is in opportunity and inclusion rather than an aesthetic that can be worn like a badge. I believe that culture is our common property, and I've borrowed that, perhaps a statement I read by Assemble, and that everyone has the right to view, critically engage with and produce art. And this image is from Steve McQueen's Year 5 exhibition at the Tate Britain, in which he included a photograph of every single school child in London of that year, that age from Year 5. So that, I think that's a good illustration of culture is our common property. I also think the same is true of politics. It is our common property. Everyone has the right to be a politician or to contribute to a shared life. But how easy is it to fathom the systems and institutions of either? I go along to Labour Party meetings, and I think there's brilliant people at those meetings. But honestly, most of the systems and discussion procedures are unfathomable to me, you know, and I've got a bit of a background in that area. I don't know how those systems and that language and that vocabulary and those processes can be accessible and shared by everyone. They're impossible, I think. So that's my first manifesto point. My second manifesto point is counteract, don't perpetuate the things that make you angry. And again, that's not mine. I heard that at a lecture, just trying to, at a conference, and it was a conference about artist-led initiatives. And I really love this because I think, what can you do? Like everybody has, well, not Caroline and Julia, and I suspect others have voiced, well, what can you do in the face of impossibility? You know, all you can do are those things that are the opposite of the things that you disagree with. That's all you can do, kind of put those little things into reverse. Consciously reverse or undo the things that we think are wrong. And I think that this is exemplified by groups such as ours, which are inclusive and nurturing rather than competitive and elitist. Or in Sarah's work that we saw last week, where respect for places and people and their creative interactions is uppermost. This might mean focusing on process rather than outcome, how you get somewhere rather than exactly where you're going. And I think politics could learn from this, like politics could learn from more than just how do we win the next election, how do we get there, how are our processes inclusive, transparent and fair. So I think politics could learn from art. My second manifesto point, no, my third one, is to be bottom up and not top down. Grassroots movements in art, politics and everything, sports, you know, everything. I'm a big believer in grassroots organisations and networks like this one and other ones. And I think if artist networks and local political ones and sports ones could also interconnect with each other, that, you know, that could be quite powerful. But that's my third manifesto point. And my fourth one is respect the way that artists do things. Art is political. All art is political in throwing the spotlight on a place or an issue. Art that makes us think, challenges us, makes us love something or argue against something else is political in its empowering and enabling of our journeys. Artists are often non-imposing, like they won't say this is what to believe. Is the word didactic? Is that word?
That's the opposite.
Oh, right. So they're not didactic.
Yeah. Just sorry.
So they don't impose a view. Artworks are often open to interpretation. They're not closed and finished. They continue in the looking of them, at them, and the experiencing of them. And that's political because it invites the viewer to be part of the process. And my illustration for this is a piece from 2017, which I'm sure people know about, which is the open bridges, where all of the bridges across the River Hull were open simultaneously at a moment, which cut the city in half and limited people's movement, you know, like hypothetically in their imaginations, people's freedom of movement was kind of curtailed momentarily. And I think this is incredibly political, like it makes you think about what is a place something that's bounded and closed, or is it open and in relation to other places? It maybe connects with Hull's history. It may connect with Brexit. It may connect with issues to do with migration, transmigration, which has got a place in Hull's history. Like it is a very political piece, but it's artist-led, artist-instigated, and artist intervention in our everyday, rather than an artist coming in at the end of the process and producing something that, I don't know, councils or other organisations or institutions have envisaged to be important. So
Yeah.
that's really badly put, but my last manifesto point is let artists be political in their own ways. And that's it. Thank you.
Great.
Excellent. I love that last point, because that kind of is exactly, isn't it, tying in with what Julia and Caroline were saying. So let everybody be political in their own way. I think there's really something to be said about this. And this is what's nice about this group, because, you know, the way I thought about art and politics is starting to change, because I saw it as something really quite powerful and forceful almost. And you're kind of what's coming across from all three of you now, that it's something subtle and sublime and maybe almost a little bit subversive, you know, the approach that, you know, you're all exemplifying. So
Yeah.
that's lovely. I love your 5 points, Jill, and
Great.
everything you said was lovely. Thank you. Sorry,
Can I
Karen.
just reminded me, Jill, I think one of the best projects that unfortunately for me was thrown away somewhat in the City of Culture for me, because not many people discussed it or talked about it or made it a really, for me it was really profound. And it wasn't the actual work itself, it was that very point you're making, that it wasn't made by people, the process wasn't seen, it was suddenly put onto the side of the building on the opening night. It was, of all the people, the refugees, all the people we've had coming, all the migrants we've had coming to Hull for, you know, 500-600 years or more. Do you remember that opening night? When
On
it
the
was,
was it on the side of the Deep, that one?
yes, yeah. Now, it was a most really fascinatingly interesting project, but it sort of came and went, what, in 3...
Arrivals and departures, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, departures. I couldn't remember.
Arrivals and departures.
Yeah, and you know, it was absolutely incredible about the history of Hull, and also how relevant it was to now, you know, then and now. But it sort of came and went because it was done. I know it was Slung Low, I think, wasn't it? And I think it was Slung Low company who do a lot of installations and theatre work as well. Was it Slung Low? No, maybe not.
No,
No,
like
but-
research is actually based at the university. It's like Nick Evans. So
Right.
it's like ongoing research. And it was one of those great projects where, you know, the artwork is rooted in some research. So yeah. That's a long.
I felt that not enough people had sort of really recognised it as an incredibly powerful thing, because the big Made in Hull one, everybody got the splash of that. It was amazing, wasn't it? We all loved it, you know, at the time. But the other one for me was so profound about Hull. And
I'm afraid to say I always feel there's a huge resistance. No, you could really get into politics now, but a resistance to anything that educates or opens up things. People have been entertained. It's like you talking about the mousetrap. It's like I'm finding it really difficult to come to terms with working class people voting Tory. I mean, you know, but essentially it is about this thing that, you know, people don't want to know about. They want to be entertained and not necessarily have their eyes opened, which is consequently, I think artists try and do both, because you lure people in, you're trying to, you know, get that thing going, and then say, but by the way, this is about a lot more than...
What I was saying was linking to Jill's point, that it was maybe given to us by this company who came in, and it was suddenly it was there. And I don't feel there was enough build up to it. For example, the bridges thing that Lou did, Lou Duffy Howard, that had quite a lot of, it was a subtle thing actually, wasn't it? It was very clever as well. But it did have quite a lot of coverage locally because everybody knew, well, a lot of people in the arts, people in Hull knew who they were. They were from the grassroots, if you like. Whereas this thing on the side, which had equal, well, amazing sort of, to me, I opened my eyes to all sorts of things about Hull, and I've been long enough, but I just thought, wow, and it seemed to come and go, and now I haven't heard anybody talking about it since, and it seems such a shame. And I think it's that reason what Jill was saying, it wasn't from the roots, it wasn't from bottom up.
I really like that actually.
Yeah.
I remember the City of Culture, because when it happened, I was like, I did sort of stand back for it because I'm not from Hull. So I was really sort of wanting to see how Hull did it, if you see what I mean, and but I found it all, the first night, the opening night, was really moving. I thought the projections were brilliant, and they had the sea coming out at you, the war, and actually the whole thing was very emotional actually, and people were really emotionally involved in that piece. But and I did go and see I was actually on it. There's a picture of me on and I was thinking, well, how did you get that picture? Where's that from? And it must be something. And Dennis File as well, who worked for the Maritime Museum, he was on it. And I think, you see, we weren't asked for our permission to use our pictures.
Oh, no, that sort of thing is it's quite important in a way, isn't it? Because you didn't.
But the whole thing was. I was standing there because it was that new CD4I building, wasn't it?
That's it. It was there as well, yeah.
The new bit. And so everyone was standing there. And what was amazing about that and different from the other one in the square, Queen Victoria Square, was because that one obviously really connected with people from Hull and also connected beyond Hull, because those scenes of the war, the Blitz, everything, because we just had the war in, the Gulf Wars, the refugees, everyone that was in that square was affected. But when the other one, I was looking at the people around me, looking at it as though everybody was completely gobsmacked at the history. And
the wonderful thing was,
and I think there isn't enough information, and maybe people were absolutely shocked that in the 1800s, there was a succession of people from all over the world that came, including Russia. At one point there was loads of Spanish people or Russian people, and then recently there's been loads more from Africa and Syria and Asia. But the whole
for me, they could have done something with the people.
But the other thing is the Civic Society in Hull. Because there's a book, and it was written by a woman actually, the last edition, which I got from Waterstones. I've lent it to Barney actually, but it's a fascinating history of the struggle to get education in this city and the struggle for Hull University to exist. Do you know what I mean? So the city has been very resistant to higher education, to educating the people, and that's evident with the fishing industry, where you have 10,000 people up to, because they reckon it's 6, but everybody reckons it's more than that, 10,000 men mainly dead through a very inefficient and unsafe fishing industry. And that is another thing. And also I was at a party in Hutt Street. This is where politics just rears up sometimes. And there was a guy arguing about the fishing industry, as people were when I first came to Hull in 2002. It almost seemed like there was a boycott against fish because of what was going on in the Atlantic or wherever, the Cod Wars or whatever, or the remnants of that. And then this guy was arguing about, we've lost the fish, the same old argument. And I said, well, basically, you murdered all the fish. And I said the word murder because, and it was interesting because I'd also got a video from Millets where there's a guy in South Cave who used to make all these videos about Hull and the fishing industry. And this particular video has an apology by someone who works for AB Ports, who apologizes for the overfishing that happened. I mean, I was brought up in Great Yarmouth, so the herring industry, which also died out in the 60s, well before the fishing industry died out in Hull, which was the 70s. So I do feel, I never liked herring, you know, but the herring industry disappeared because they overfished it. And the same thing here, overfishing, murdering. So I use the word murder as a, because, you know, he was really drunk, this guy, and everybody was just getting a bit pissed off. So I just said, well, you murdered all the fish. And then it like stopped everybody. And then there was this apology. So the politics happens around us. And sometimes it's because, yeah, as you say, people don't know. And sometimes it's outsiders like me who come into the city to work, who suddenly go, oh, what about this? You know, and that is the thing about people coming in. But the first thing just engaged everybody. But the second, I think that thing at the deep shocked everybody. That's why everybody was like, oh.
But I think,
I've been wanting to find a copy of that video because I thought it was fascinating.
It was.
so
I think,
I think sorry,
as
Jen.
yeah, I was going to say, in that same set of projections, I mean, one of the things about projections is that they are obviously very temporary and immaterial, so they run the risk of having a short life. But at the same time, there was one on Scale Lane, you know, where that new mural's gone up.
Yeah. On the side of the building.
Yeah, and it was, I think it was called The Indignity of Labour.
Yes.
Quite simple silhouette shapes.
So subtle, yeah.
And it was built on the stories of young people who either unemployed or claiming benefit. But their original images were filmed in old, like, industrial buildings, like the Lord Line building. So there was this kind of disused, washed up buildings and disused, washed up lives, and then that was projected onto that wall. And that was also, for me, that was interesting because that used to be the place of prosperity. That was a place where the merchants would have lived close to their, I don't know, warehouses or wharfs or whatever. So like the same wall is then, you know, is then the ground for that projection, and it's now a ground for a piece of graffiti, which some people see as a bit of contentious. So I really like those layers of history, and so for me a projection is like that. It's a bit like a layer of stuff on something that already exists. Like my little image at the beginning of my PowerPoint is that wall, and those bricks already exist. Someone's come and added to that existing story or history. Yeah, so yeah, I was just going to, and there was another projection underneath the, like underneath the bypass, not the bypass, but underneath Myton Bridge, and it was about the club scene, like the nighttime club scene, slightly underground. So being underneath the bridge was like really apt for it. So but Caroline knows that, like, I'm writing about Hollywood at the moment. Like that for me is such a political projection because it so much was about the artist stepping back and giving the creative stage to you know, like Caroline, you were one of the people who took part in that, weren't you? Or however many people were involved. That to me is incredibly political because it's not art given to someone, it's them or those people who are involved having the opportunity to make their mark just for a day.
The thing is that art can engage people, and that thing I said about entertaining, it's almost like when you're teaching and you're trying to get some things across and you're thinking of clever ways, and art is one of the clever ways when you talk about projections and layers and getting people to inquire about things and feel. And people were really engaged. I mean, we had so many people in that gallery at CAG that we had never had before, because people are actually quite scared of culture. Because it's been made into an elitist sort of thing at times. I mean, it was just killing me that the Ferrans was so full of people, because prior to that, I used to be able to go in there and sit for hours in the quiet. It was because, and I feel deeply sad in a way that so much of it has just slipped away. You know, and there was so much research and work gone into it, and you know, and all the gentrification you were talking about. It's a never-ending story of things being encompassed. How can we make, you know, and I think the government does that all the time in order to, you know, we'll just take it into our own, what's the word for it? We'll
I want to give one more chance for one more person, so I'm just going to kind of draw this conversation to a brief end. I just want to say as well, I mean, it does highlight, you know, that what we can do is we can send out subtle political messages in a way that is entertaining. I don't think one needs to exclude another at all. And I think that installation on the side of the deep, you know, illustrates that it was very, very entertaining, but a very political message as well. So I think that's you know, that's the power of art. So that's great. I'm wondering who would like to go next. Is it Sarah? Sarah, have you prepared something?
I haven't prepared something, and I'm feeling like I could prepare something for next week, or I could just blather on for a couple of minutes now.
Well, let's wait for next week then, if you
Okay,
want.
and I'll get some images so I can properly share them.
Because I think you'll have a lot to contribute to this subject.
I think there's subtle politics. For me, I think politics is in everything you wear, in the way you choose to buy your food. It wasn't, you know, it's in every materials that you choose, scale that you choose when you're making work, as much as the themes. But yes, if there's anyone else who.
Okay, excellent. So we've got, David.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just wanted to ask Jill a question, actually, which I didn't get a chance to butt in there.
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah, I was just wondered, your remark about figurative art, that non-figurative art could not necessarily be, or figurative art doesn't necessarily have to be political. What did you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, sorry, what I meant was that I think when I was at art college, I was over enamoured by abstract painting. It was like that was the thing to do, and I never questioned not doing it. And I think I was trying to say that my politics and my art was separate, and that they joined up later on. But in saying that, that doesn't mean that I think abstract painting can be political. That's what even though, do you see what I mean?
Well, I do see what you mean, but if you could perhaps explain why you thought that.
Why I think it now, or why I didn't think it then.
No, what you think is political about abstract art, for instance.
Okay, so I think my statement was art doesn't have to be figurative to be political. So I think,
yes,
I don't know, something like let me think, something like a Mondrian painting is, for me, it's about the coexistence of elements within a whole. Sorry, David, you asked. It's about the coexistence of elements in a whole, where each of the elements is discernible but contributes to a strong overall composition, which for me is a kind of potentially a bit of a metaphor about how we are in society. You know, we're individuals and we can be discernible and distinct as individuals, but we combine to make a stronger whole. Now that might sound a bit corny, but that's an abstract painting, which is colours and shapes and organisation of that visually within a frame, which potentially could be read as being some sort of metaphor for our place as individuals within a society. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does.
Yeah.
But I was thinking in a broader context about abstract in general. Not being actually seen as, well, in fact, being seen as apolitical.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah.
And that kind of got me thinking about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that is that it was the modernist thing, wasn't it? That somehow abstract painting was above all
Yeah.
of this. It was
Yeah.
that kind of universal, above politics and context.
Cerebral itself, you know, cerebral was of a higher sphere from anything other than, that's what that would be my impression when I was at art school too.
And mine, but we were modernists, you know. We went to art school during that era, and there's some value in some of those perspectives, but definitely now I can read an abstract painting politically as much as a more figurative one. And abstract images have been used as the kind of, I don't know, the kind of aesthetic of political movements like Russian constructivism, or abstract paintings after, abstract expressionism was used as the badge of freedom of expression during the Cold War. So
definitely was. Ed told me, I was amazed because I was talking to Ed about politics and art, him being a fine artist, etc. And I wanted to get his views. And he just said, he amazed me. He told me that people like Rauschenberg and Pollock were actually invited by the government in America to paint for America, to paint American paintings. Now, if that isn't political, that's a completely other side of it, isn't it? That's an amazing thing to hear about. I didn't know that they had been sort of commandeered almost to stand up for, whatever America represented at the time, as you just mentioned, the Cold War, etc. I mean, it was very much that time, wasn't it? Fascinating.
It's the opposite of socialist realism, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you were pitted against Russia, you were.
Yeah, fascinating. I didn't know that. Yeah.
It's quite interesting with what they're doing with this Festival of Brexit, or this Festival 20. I can't remember what its actual name is, and it's kind of a festival of it seems to be. I don't know much about it, but there's like an element of a Festival of Britain thing going on there, where it's about celebrating Britain, I imagine, and the artists that they've got as like as one of the creative directors, can't remember the term, is Blast Theory, who did 2097, who were not artists as in like painters, but artists who are doing something contemporary that's digital, that's kind of, I don't know what they're going to come up with, but so that's kind of connected
in itself, the fact that exists to try and make it all right and pretend that we're all included in this new Britain moving forward, it's like political brainwashing.
But that's
a
how
massive
I see
misuse
it.
of funds.
So I should say that's how I see what they're doing. I might be kind of, off the mark with it. So it might be entirely perfect and wholesome.
It's a minefield when artists get involved directly and deliberately with politics, like Futurism and Marinetti and all that, the whole fascism thing, and machines, and not nature, and then I think it's quite frightening when art deliberately is used to try and plaster over the cracks, shall we say, and and people are easily persuaded. I mean,
Well, as an artist, I think you want opportunities to show your work, and you want opportunities to work on a massive scale. That's really exciting, but are you being used?
Yeah.
If you're right, if you can speak truth, if your ideas are being moderated and sort of squashed a bit to be more palatable to the political, people who are paying you, essentially. That's always the problem artists have got, is you don't have the freedom to do exactly what you want. You always have, it's always mitigated by the person or the organisation or the party who's financing it. And that's the problem with a lot of, it's exactly that,
Same as pop music.
It's the worst thing, isn't it, when, say, artists working thinking they're counteracting or challenging systems or values, and then just found they're being used to uphold the thing that they're wanting to fight against. That's just such a
Happens a lot.
shit thing.
Yeah, like
But
how art is
people-
used to,
Well-
to gentrify areas. Before gentrification, artists are often used to keep places, get places vibrant.
They're encouraged. They're encouraged, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry,
absolutely.
Sarah, you wanted to say something. Sorry.
What was I going to say? I've forgotten already. It was about what the artist and this festival that's coming up. It's gone. Sorry, it'll come back to me. Thanks, Glynis.
Do you know what though? Do you think like the original Festival of Britain, that was very positive for art and society, wasn't it?
But it was supposed to be a distraction, wasn't it? Wasn't it meant to be? Dave, you know about this. It was meant to be distract. And
No, it was meant to cheer people up.
Yeah.
Because of the war years and the austerity and all the rest of it. And they were still rationing, of course, and was until 1952, 53. So, yeah, it was there to entertain. It was a spectacle in that sense. But I think it was a positive one. And that's what we should aim for, really, But then what you're saying about this whole Britain thing, I don't know. It sounds suspicious.
People are quite quick to forget. That's what I was going to say. So coming out of COVID, everybody's a bit like, well, we've just been through this. We all know that it's happened, but we're all very willing to kind of it's not forgetting it, but as soon as we're told we're allowed to kind of hug each other again, everybody's very keen to hug each other again, and nothing's really changed. It's that we've been given permission, and people will wait for permission to have to be, it's a strange thing. So I think this may be connected. People forget bad stuff very quickly when they've been given permission to.
Well, they've been
like climate change. Let's just forget that. Oh, it's lovely and sunny.
Yeah.
Let's not look at the beaches that are covered in plastic.
Well, there's some things that you can't deny. Exactly.
There's always that line, isn't there, with any life events for either personal or particularly and wider, where it's half full or half empty. I mean, I don't know what this festival 22, whatever it's called, is going to be, but I gather it would have a similar feel to. Obviously, it's in London, isn't it? Is it everywhere, or is it just in London?
Focused is Birmingham is the hub, is it?
Birmingham, oh, is it?
I think so, but I might be wrong. I think it's countrywide,
Yeah,
but I think
that it is everywhere, that it reaches out everywhere, and those kind of 10 companies, well, 10 collectives that have been chosen really reach into all parts, really.
I suppose if it's supposing to be reaching other parts that other things can't possibly reach, like the Festival of Britain, that was just focused in London at the time, wasn't it? At least it's going. I try, as all these things, I always try to be half full about it until maybe, I get my head a little bit more realistic after the event and then see it maybe for what it was. Maybe by nature, but I want to think that there will be some positive things for individual and smaller groups of people. But, you wonder, it's very early on, isn't it? And there's been a pandemic as well. So it's a massive, massive ask. Not only is it an ask, it is a very awkward time, I think, to do it personally. A year when there's been very little healing or evaluation gone on between, people who voted in or out. And this is still such a massive curveball, isn't it, in our society? And if genuinely, I mean, I was the first one to say earlier, I do think that the power of art, can redeem a hell of a lot of people's lives, but 18 months and a pandemic in between, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who's going to get what out of it yet at the moment? I'm possibly half empty at the minute about it. It's a shame because I'm not normally like that.
Well, there's a movement to cancel it. It's going to cost.
Is there?
I've just looked it up. 120 million pounds. Yeah, of public funds, and some people are saying it's a waste of money.
And a lot
No,
of
I
it
don't-
comes, a lot of it is taken away from the other public services, but
Services.
also
yeah,
art money that would have funded a lot of other arts organisations and
Like
who,
all
who
the,
do work with people every day.
yeah,
yeah.
that
I
is.
guess
In the same, you know, they've just, you know, Gavin Williamson wants to cut funding for the arts education by 50% or part.
Yeah, it's absurd, isn't it? It's Kafkaesque.
How can you say that the arts are the one thing that's going to heal us all, bring us all together, help us to understand Brexit, move forward? Actually, it's not worth studying it, and if you do study it, you're going to be on the bones.
Yeah, that's the
Expect
right.
to be. Why should
need,
we?
you need to embed it in education.
Critical, nothing is. That's definitely critical. That is absolutely the key thing, isn't it? That's the key thing. It's just absurd. It's absurd. It really is.
But art's one of the things that we can do by ourselves, for ourselves. And that's why it's so important
We do,
to
don't
do it in schools, because it's one of the things that you need to do, you can do for yourself, by yourself. It's if you can't communicate with people, or if you just need time, you know, it's for so many reasons, it balances out your left and right brain, I think. It's like,
yeah, there's all sorts of side. I mean, I'm crocheting at the moment. I got taught to crochet, knit, draw. We had all sorts of stuff, embroidery even in primary school. And I just think, because I was brought up in the 60s primary school, 70s secondary school, and we did a lot of things as part of our courses, you see. So when we did history, we ended up drawing the Bayeux Tapestry, or we ended up making a garrison.
I think what you're talking about, Glenys, is long before they had the curriculum, whereby you could actually go from one school to the next to the next. This was happening, I can't speak for now, where every school would be doing the same thing because they no longer trusted in teachers to be inventive, creative, respond to the children in a way that when they were doing something that was interesting, you think, oh, right, we won't do that. We'll go with this because this is good. But you would find every place doing mini beasts at the same time, every place doing, and it would all be laid out. And what teachers used to be is creative instructors who would go with the flow and find a way. And I'm quite passionate about this, to be honest, because I feel they killed teaching once the national curriculum started to decide everybody had to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, on art, because I suppose, as Sarah says, you know, anyone can do art, but I mean, I suppose you have to know how to say, if you want to draw, well, you can do it on an iPad with your finger, but you need some sort of spatial skills, and some art you know, if you have an art education, it includes doing practical things, apart from digital things. You do get that sense of embodying your whole body with creativity rather than just your brain and your thumb and your finger, you know. So it's an embodiment of stuff, and also drama. I think when I grew up as well, we had drama that used to come in from outside the school.
Yeah, and I was in it, used to do it.
Yeah, so and we used to look forward to that because you had different. And we had half an hour off, you know, normal school to actually watch a performance.
But don't you think that there's something about them wanting to get rid of art and creativity altogether, because artists tend to think outside the box?
Yeah, they don't want criticism.
And if you develop that side, people will start thinking more for themselves.
Yeah. That's what I was saying, yeah. Critical thinking is not encouraged by the state, is it? Let's be honest.
No.
Well, we've had a return to learning by rote.
Right.
Yeah. And when we're in a digital age where you're presented with so much information, so many variations on a story, one thing you really need is to be able to have some level of critical discernment. to understand what's a first person, a second person, a third hand, piece of information, secondary.
Yeah.
And children should be allowed to approach work in their own, because I personally feel that we're all born with certain preoccupations, and you see it in children when you're teaching young children. There's certain things they're good at and certain things they're not good at, but that if you can click into what makes them tick and makes them want to work, they will then start getting better at the other things as well. If you try and force it in a rote fashion onto them, all you do is create a lack of self-esteem, a lack of, to bring children into their own. You have to let them have some say in what they do and how they do it, And
well, this brings us to the whole knotty problem of exams. I mean, our country is still so obsessed with testing and exams, but children are made to fail very early on, aren't they? They're made to feel like failures so early on, and that's politics to me. It's keeping.
I mean, primary schools used to be somewhere where you'd go and the children were like puppies, their tails wagging all the time.
I think
because it was so wonderful. And then they brought in SATs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now they've got eating disorders and stuff.
They can do it. Most primary schools are wonderful places to visit still. I have to say, I've been in quite a few in the last few years, and they still are like little puppies. They're still marvellous, still full of, I suppose it depends. Yeah, sometimes it often depends on the actual teacher in the room, doesn't it? And how it's very.
You have to fight for it. I mean, you have to fight for.
You do.
Teachers do have to fight for doing things differently. And I'm not saying I don't think there's wonderful teachers out there who are full of imaginative, creative, but it is kind of, there is this, I mean, they're talking about lots of extra time now, working longer hours and whatever to try and catch up with after the pandemic. And to me, it sounds dangerously like they're going to try and force feed these kids. And it just doesn't work. I mean, I see the children who succeeded in life to be, successful in the sense of being whole human beings. And generally, they're the ones who've been allowed to use their imagination, make solutions, find ways of.
I think we're really encapsulating, all of us are obviously creative minds, and that's the distinction between people who don't do that, who do. My mother, as a nursery teacher in the war, she told me this story once where she was in London, it was in the Blitz, it was her very first job or something, and she had all these little 5-year-olds cutting out animals, to put on the windows like freezers. They've been done forever, and that sort of work with children. And one of her fellow teachers said to her, this sums it up to me really, said to her, "What, they're not very good, are they? And they're not, you could have given them a template. You could have done it for them. Let's all put pink here. Let's all put, whatever it is." And my mum had to really stand up against that. And, and she taught me that. She gave me that in my head about creative. You don't do it for them. You let them play. You let them. And if they all look wiggly and they're all cut out badly, doesn't matter. That's what they've made, and some will be better than others. And that's life. That's a learning thing, isn't it? But that's to do with art, really, isn't it? It's to do with a creative mind who doesn't mind